Hey, deserving listeners, Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and we're almost done with the trial. We're well past the verdict at this point, but a lot of you have been wanting me to finish it out, particularly Amber Heard's testimony. We're about halfway through cross-examination. I'm well rested. It's the morning time. I'm ready to go. Let's see what happens.
When I spilled wine accidentally on you for falling asleep and screaming in front of my kids and freaking Jack out, and that's trying.
I would appreciate it. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Johnny.
That fucked him up, you know.
I'm sorry I fucked your son up.
No, it weirded him out. He'd never...
I'm so sorry I fucked your kids up.
He didn't fuck my kids up, but it was pretty...
Okay, so we're hearing a common style of their conversation. They're not yelling at each other, but there's a fair amount of hostility between the two of them. Particularly Amber, she's being sarcastic entirely. I mean, you can be the judge as to who's being more hostile this moment. He is expressing some concern. Now, if you're pro Johnny Depp, you might say, well, he deserves to say that because Amber Heard's an awful person, and she absolutely probably did F up Johnny Depp's son. So I think what they're talking about is they let their conflict, or he's saying she let their conflict bleed into the knowledge of his children, and Johnny Depp is saying, you effed him up. And then Amber Heard is saying, yeah, I'm sorry I effed up your kids. Oh, I'm so sorry. Or, well, I can't even really nail the sarcasm. I think what she's saying is, you're dumb and ridiculous, and I didn't F up your kids, that kind of thing. And who knows? Maybe she didn't. If we go pro Amber Heard side of things, maybe what happened was they were both fighting, and the conflict became known to Johnny Depp's kid, and they're both to blame. And now, because Johnny Depp is abusive, he is taking it out on Amber and using words like, you effed up my kid. In this moment, we hear, if we just take a more distance, neutral view, she is saying sarcastically, essentially, no, I didn't F up your kid. What are you talking about? And then he says, okay, well, you didn't F up my kid. So he's pulling back a little bit. And I'm always looking for these kinds of clues, and I didn't set out to do this, but as I listen to these audio recordings, I'm noticing that a certain mode kicks in for me in terms of my clinical modes. I have several clinical modes, I guess, and one of them is when I hear couples talking about a previous fight that they had been in. It's a very common exercise in therapy, right? Particularly in the first phase of therapy, the couple will come in and talk about a fight that they maybe even had on the drive to my office, or had a week ago and it was a really big one, or they've been fighting for the past month straight and they can't really move past that. It's really hard. Now, if I were oriented a different way, a solution-focused way, then I might actually really try to get them away from those memories and trying to work it out. But I come from a style of therapy where I actually will try to help them to re-narrativize what happened in the past, because the narrative that they have is almost all the time inaccurate, if not all the time, in that they see their partner. Well, just think about for yourself just think about the last conflict you got into with a partner or a friend or something, and think about the way that you see it and the way that it feels to you, particularly right as you're in the fight or right after the fight. We tend to look at our partners like they're evil, like they're horrible human beings. And I'm guessing, just percentage-wise, some of you actually were with what people might call evil people, psychopathic people, sadistic people. But the vast majority of you, 98% of you, just according to statistics, are probably remembering events where the person you were fighting with was not a psychopath, was not antisocial. And so you framed it that way in your head because that's how it felt, because that's how we are. I could go down a whole rabbit hole of all the different cognitive biases that we fall prey to in those situations, but we do that. But that narrative can be very destructive, right? Because if both people are trying their best but getting triggered and maybe doing some not so great things to each other, saying not so great things, or not listening to each other, which isn't great, but to amplify that, times 100 and say that your partner is a psychopath, that doesn't really lend itself to any kind of solution. Plus, you're not taking any responsibility for what you did in terms of triggering the other person or whatever. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it is one-sided and one side is causing the problem. But anyway, point is I am frequently hearing these stories, and I never know for sure what happened, but I'm often trying to determine what I would have seen if I would have been there based on their descriptions. Because I'm not making a judgment call like, you're right and you're wrong. I'm more trying to figure out what I need to emphasize and what each person needs to work on. So as I'm hearing this audio, that mode is kicking in. So in this recorded interaction between the two of them, he's trying to express, hey, I can't have you do that in front of the kids. That's essentially what he's saying. And what she's saying, I think, is, I feel like you're attacking me unfairly. Okay. So they are communicating that in, he's being more direct. She's being a lot less direct, if I am correct, which I wouldn't know if that's what she's trying to get at. And even deeper, if we go off the Dr. Curry conceptualization of Amber Heard, then she is terrified that Johnny Depp is going to use this as an excuse to abandon her. For borderline histrionic people, particularly borderline people, they are in a constant state of anxiety that their close relationships are going to abandon them, to the point where they're 100% convinced it's going to happen. They believe that if the person is not abandoning them in the moment, the person is most definitely planning on abandoning them, that kind of thing. Because that paranoia held true when they were 2, 3, 4 years old, no longer applies, and of course causes them to push people away and then create abandonment where it didn't exist to begin with. But all of us really worry about that. That's the primary reason why we get triggered in conflict. It's the most common reason, if not always present. When we're in conflict with our partners and we have problems holding on to our differentiation, we have problems being calm and speaking in a vulnerable way, in a way that isn't triggering or accusatory towards the other person. We have a hard time not rolling our eyes or being sarcastic or using the F word, or, it's hard for us. And the reason why almost all the time, if not all the time, is because we're actually terrified of being rejected by our partner, and we're not usually acknowledging it to ourselves, let alone to our partners. And so it's a part of that for all of us, but for people with borderline, it's times 10 or 100 or something, and very acute, and it overwhelms the individual. So they will resort to a lot of different things to try to defend that. But all of us do this. All of us, when our partner accuses us of something, even if it's something really quite mundane, like, hey, you put the dishes in the dishwasher wrong, all of us will get defensive in a situation like that, because generally speaking, we are programmed, we evolved seemingly to be terrified of rejection from the tribe, because 100, 200,000, 300,000 years ago, as our species was evolving, and then previous species of primates in all likelihood were like this as well, common ancestors of bonobos and chimps, this sort of thing. We clearly evolved from a social species, one that depends on cohesion and protection and resource sharing and mate selection. If you're rejected from the tribe, it's going to be hard to mate, this kind of thing. So our entire survival and reproduction success depends on our ability to please the tribe, to please our fellow kin and our people. And to be rejected means not only will you be not able to reproduce, but also you will be left to the wild, where predators, panthers, tigers, ate us. It's a total myth that we've always been at the top of the food chain. We were not top of the food chain before a certain point. But anyway, our species and previous species were selected for those people who had a massive compulsion to try to eliminate the possibility of rejection. And one of the ways that is mediated is that when we see a sign of rejection, we have a tremendous amount of fear. And then we also have another effect, is when we have fear of rejection, we try to stop it, right? So we might reach out and grab people like, don't leave me, or we might become pleasing, or we might attack how they're accusing us. Like, no, you're wrong to think that about me. I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Even when that actually can compel the person to reject us because we're rejecting them by saying that they're stupid, right? So when we hear a feedback like, hey, you didn't do the dishwasher right, it's important to recognize that deep down you're probably being triggered, particularly if you have issues around this, that I'm about to be rejected, but that's not really rational, right? So we need differentiation. We need to be able to look at our feelings and say, is that rational? That's what I'm feeling. That's okay, but it's not rational. They're just saying dishwasher, big deal. Sometimes I have feedback about how they put things in the cupboard. If we can't have that kind of feedback, what's going on here? So I think that is likely what's happening. And then because if Dr. Curry's conceptualization is right, Amber Heard is particularly triggered, and her way of coping with that seemingly from the audio is to get sarcastic, to bulldoze, to attack, to belittle, maybe even put hands on. We've seen multiple instances of that these recordings are often surrounded in part around Johnny Depp saying, hey, you did this. You punched me. I didn't punch you. I hit you. You're a baby. And it might seem bizarre, but if the conceptualization is right, which I can never know, that attacking of Johnny Depp is actually this very bastardized version of don't leave me. And please don't think that about me, because if you think that about me, you're going to leave me. So if I bulldoze and put you down and overtalk you and belittle you, then that notion that I hit you the other day will go away and you won't leave me, which of course makes no logical sense, but that's the pattern that people learned when they were young, or they had to resort to when they were young. So I think we're hearing another version of that, but I don't know.
You think you're controlling yourself?
Your characters become so clear, especially when you use them. It's embarrassing for you. I'm going to walk away now because you're actually making me see even worse. And believing me, I'm not going to be calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning after I have an Ambien and think, I'm going to just fucking forgive and move on. Trust me.
Okay, I'm curious as to why they're even playing this audio. They're both just fighting, and there's no indication of abuse. It is interesting in this moment that she's saying, I'm going to walk away. That's the first time we've ever heard her say that.
With whoever that is, because that would be a special kind of fucking person. No doubt.
It's you and Mr. Depp in that recording, right?
That's correct.
And you're discussing what happened in the Bahamas in December of 2015, right?
No, that's not correct. We were discussing a part of it.
You're discussing when you screamed at Mr. Depp in front of his children, correct?
No, we were talking about a part of that argument.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like from her description in the audio, Amber Heard, maybe Johnny Depp was intoxicated and had spilled wine on Amber Heard. Maybe even he passed out or something, I don't know. And then she screamed at him. I'm going to take a guess and say that it wasn't just spilling of wine that triggered her.
Including when you screamed at Mr. Depp in front of his children.
That's not a fair characterization of what happened.
Mr. Depp says you screamed at him when he accidentally spilled wine on you, correct?
I realize that's what Johnny said.
Yeah, and Mr. Depp tells you that this freaked out.
It's also what she said. Did I not read that right? You need a woman who will not jump up and scream if she's been spilled on. Oh, well, so Amber Heard's saying, I screamed, but not at you. Okay. It's interesting, though, that in this moment she says, and I hope you're happy with whoever that is that you find that one, because that would be a special kind of effing person, wouldn't it? And she says, sorry, I didn't mean it that way, really. It's not worth it for me. You're not worth it. We're not in love anymore. All right, so this is interesting. So soon after this, she leaves, she comes back, and he says, I'm, of course, going through a lot with my mom. I think his mom had been sick, and maybe he even knew that his mom would be dying soon. And Johnny says, and I, of course, I'm feeling a lot of things regarding my mom's health and the family situation and all that. And of course, feeling all this stuff, and I'm going through stuff, and I don't voice it a lot, but of course I am. And then Amber says, okay, I'll try to be more understanding, okay. And then Johnny says, okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't. And then Amber says, it's just kind of when you're in that way, it's hard to tell. And he says, I'm not using that as my excuse for what we spoke about earlier. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, that is all flowing through my veins every day. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good conversation. It's interesting to read that transcript. And interesting thing is that now we have to allow for ourselves to recognize that we've only heard the worst bits of their audio. I think there's hours and hours of audio, and it sounds like there's actually some functional, nice conversations that are happening between the two. Neither side would want really to present that when they're actually being nice to each other, because it contradicts their their argument. But I think that's important for us. And when I react to television shows or other kinds of things, I will often try to remember that the things that we're seeing are often what the TV show is trying to present to us as the most interesting bits. And we have to imagine that there's a lot of stuff that's being left on the editing floor, metaphorically, because it wasn't interesting TV, but it was functional or neutral or that kind of thing.
You don't seem too concerned about that, do you?
I had a lot of concerns.
You don't mention Mr. Depp sexually assaulting you in this recording, do you?
That was not the point of that conversation. If I had gotten into the details of what happened to me with him, it would have been another fight.
You just accused Mr. Depp of, quote, using his kids, right? In that
He
recording.
would often use other people, yes.
And you challenge him to find a woman who will not, quote, jump up and scream if she has been spilled on 3 times in a row.
That is correct.
Not a woman who would put up with sexual abuse, right?
I was pointing out the ridiculous nature of him expecting me not to react to something.
I mean, maybe this works on the jury. It wouldn't work on me. There's been a number of questions from cross-examination that is along these lines, like, how come you didn't mention this then? And everyone knows that victims will almost never report what they've been through, and certainly wouldn't confront their abuser with it on audio recording. I mean, that could be a death sentence for many victims. So that detail doesn't really resonate. The detail of that I was saying in the last episode, I believe, where there are these incidents where she's claiming she was brutally beaten over the span of an hour or something, or a long period of time, where she's being thrown around, she's being punched repeatedly in the face with his hands that have rings all over them, to the point where she loses consciousness. And the next day, or even later that day, she'll take pictures of other things, clearly to document what had happened: the broken bed, the hair on the ground, his graffiti on the mirror, but doesn't take a picture of her face. And the pictures of her face, either when she's in public or even when she is trying to document the abuse, like when she had the bruise on her arm, she's taking a picture of that bruise, which clearly was a bruise. And if that was Johnny Depp, then that does show evidence of violence to her. But she mainly was claiming that he had been beating her in the face until she became unconscious, not just for a few minutes, but I think seemingly for hours she was unconscious, which would indicate a pretty significant head trauma incident, and would probably have some kind of indication to one, especially the way she describes it. If he said that he took a bat to her head one time and it was, under the hairline, then maybe it'd be hard to see evidence of that without shaving your head. But the way she describes it is boom, 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 boom in the face. She's taking a picture of herself with the bruise. There's no indication. She's documenting it. Later, when she's at a red carpet event, she'll claim she has makeup on. There's no way to know if that's true or not. Someone could be very good at covering that up with makeup. It'd be hard to cover up the massive amount of swelling and perhaps nose irregularities because of the trauma to the nose, lips that are swollen. She claims she iced it, but anyone who knows anything about those kinds of wounds, which I don't, I'm just a lay person, but I've heard from experts that is just not plausible. But she's documenting it, but she doesn't document her face, or when she does, it shows no indication or minimal indication she had that bruise on her nose, which again looked like a trauma to her face. It looked like one blow, perhaps one headbutt to her nose that was significant, but that's not what she claims. She claims repeated beating to unconsciousness, and the evidence just isn't there. So that is much more damning to her case, right? The fact that she didn't confront him in these audio clips is a little dubious. You could make the case that when she seems to be pulling out all the punches, if you will, all the attacks on him during the audio, "You're a baby. I didn't punch you. I hit you. Just really going after him and just rapid fire trying to just take him down. You're a P word, just boom, boom, boom. You think in that process you would also say, you did that to me, or you always do that to me 10 times worse, or you've done that to me before, or remember that night? Do we have to talk about that? Like something along those lines. So there doesn't seem to be anything like that on the recording. Does that mean she's lying about this? I don't know.
Item on the list says, quote, after dance party and drugs and music, end quote, right?
That is correct.
So you plan to have drugs at your wedding to someone you characterize as a drug addict?
To be fair, we were going to have parties, as I mentioned. So a bridal party before this, the schedule ended up changing quite a bit. And this is a draft clearly that was sent before there were a lot of changes made. The bridal
so
party
your original
and the
idea,
groom's party were separate.
Ms. Heard, your original idea was to have a rehearsal dinner with your husband, the drug addict, the monster, and then do drugs with your girlfriends on the island after your rehearsal dinner?
I realize that's what the email suggests, but that wasn't
No,
a
it's
plan.
not what it suggests.
It's interesting to go down this road, and I'm guessing at least this is somewhat helpful to the jury. To summarize what's been happening for a while now is Camille Vasquez, I believe her name is, cross-examination attorney, is asking her, wait, so he's a monster according to you regarding his drugs and alcohol, and you were totally trying to get him not to use anymore, and yet you were using frequently alcohol, drugs, not only using, but also in front of Johnny Depp. So either you, and so I think the implication is either you're lying that he's a monster when in fact you were both using drugs and alcohol frequently to in excess, and or you're a terrible human being because you were trying to get him to stop when you continued to use and have a problem. And there are these accounts of her drinking in front of him, and she would say that, yeah, I would have a couple glasses of wine sometimes or something like that. And then there's this email that is going around for their wedding. You can't see it, but it's, it says music, alcohol, and drugs. It's such a weird email. Like, hey everyone, we will do drugs at 4 p.m. I mean, it's actually says that. So what do I think about this? Well, from the beginning, I've been saying that if you have a partner that is going through recovery, you should probably refrain from using substances around them. But it's not necessary, because if you don't have a problem, like if you have a partner that has been struggling with drugs and alcohol and they're going through recovery, but you've never had a problem with substances and you like to have a joint once a month or a glass of wine with dinner every now and then, does that mean you can't enjoy those things because they have a problem? Now, the nice thing to do if you really want to help is to not do those things, but you don't have to. And certainly the individual going through recovery, they should be able to withstand those kinds of things or draw boundaries and say, look, when you're going to drink, I just can't be around you. So you can certainly have a glass of wine, but I can't be around it. Whatever the person is going through, recovery is different for different people, but some people can handle it, some people can't. So there's a lot of nuance there. It's not automatic that Amber Heard is this awful person for using substances in front of him. Now, she claims she never had a problem and that her use was pretty minimal. It doesn't sound like that based on everyone's account, most notably Ms. James, the former personal assistant to Amber Heard. Now, clearly, Ms. James was angry and resentful of Amber Heard. I think she even said as much. So was Ms. James biased? Certainly it seemed possibly, but there was nothing in her account that sounded outlandish. much. And the account, even from Amber Heard, around her own drug use and her sister's drug use, it seems reasonable that Ms. James' account that there was frequently alcohol and drugs being used by Amber Heard and her friends. So for Amber Heard to continue to want to use, she's younger, she might not have experienced the downside of drugs and alcohol to the extent that Johnny Depp had, because usually addiction is progressive over time. It gets worse over time. So she might have been still using a lot and didn't really want to give that up. It might have been a big part of her friend's identity and the fun that they had together. And I guess it certainly illuminates a double standard, because there seemed to be a lot of talk between them that was real and factual, that she was trying to get him to stop often. And the fact that she wouldn't just try to cut back herself for the sake of the marriage or him or whatever.
It was to do drugs. Yeah, your original idea was to do drugs on an island after your rehearsal dinner to the drug-fueled monster that you were about to marry, right?
As the email suggests, there was going to be weed on the island. This does not reference the Cuddle puddle that I just referenced to you.
Okay, so she says, well, when I say drugs, I meant weed. And that's not a big deal, right? Not really. I mean, if you're trying to help someone to recover, any substances is going to be an issue. But do we really think that's what she's referring to when she says drugs? Dance party and drugs and music? Is that usually what you use when you have a dance party and you're listening to a lot of music? Weed, certainly there are people that will do that, your Grateful Dead people, but, typically it's MDMA, which we know that they have a lot of history with, or at least there's alleged history. Again, I don't understand why Amber Heard just doesn't say something like, that email doesn't make me look good, and I don't know what I was thinking. I was younger then, and looking back, you're right, I probably should have thought more carefully about using substances, not only in my life, but also around my husband, who was trying to go through recovery. Yeah, looking back, I'm not proud of that. I don't understand why she and really a lot of people in these kinds of situations don't say something like that. Is that like not okay? Is that somehow a bad strategy? Because that's what I would say if I were in Amber Heard's shoes. I'd say like, yeah, that doesn't look good. And it also raises this question of, so not only were texts pulled, but so were emails? Like, my goodness. The other thing that I'll say is that she mentioned a cuddle puddle, and I think I've heard her refer to that before. If you don't know what that is, it is a consensual group of adults who get together and cuddle. And I, just before the pandemic, had a guest on the show, and I've been talking about this from actually the very beginning of this podcast in 2008. One of the very first guests I had on the podcast in 2008 was Alina Gabosh, who is a leader in sex positivity here in Seattle, which is a leading region in the world regarding sex positivity. Alina Gabosh was the executive director, I believe. I don't remember her exact title, but the leader of the Center for Sex Positive Culture in Seattle, and was also the leader of the Erotic Arts Festival that happens every year in Seattle. And she was a wonderful guest, and she opened my eyes to a lot of things regarding polyamory, regarding S&M, regarding kink positivity, and regarding human sensuality and our need for that kind of thing. And there are a lot of informal and formal groups of people who will get together and cuddle. And of course, when we look at that as Americans, we'll say, oh, it must be some kind of sex party, like a swingers party. And certainly there can be that kind of thing, but more often than not, these groups they actually have explicit rules saying there will be no sexual contact. This is just for people to have human contact, which we need so much in our life, and we get so very little, particularly as Americans, particularly as Seattleites. Yeah, I'm looking on our website. You can go to our website, psychologyinseattle.com, go to the episode page, and it lists all 1,000+ episodes of audio episodes that we've produced over the years. And the episode was just before the pandemic happened, actually in March of 2020, and it's titled Our Cuddling Needs. So I interviewed someone who started a cuddling organization here in Seattle, and there are many, in which people get together and they just cuddle for an hour, listen to music, maybe a little bit of conversation, but not much. and it's not sexual. People of all genders will just lay down kind of in a configuration, and maybe there'll be some adjusting here and there. Maybe some people fall asleep because they're so relaxed, and we need more of that. Now, of course, if you can cuddle with your friends and family, that is the ideal, because they're right there and you know them and you don't have to go to a place where you don't know people. But if you can't have that, or you just want to cuddle with randos, the free hug people at the park, that kind of thing, we need more of that in our life. Now, of course, people can abuse this and can non-consensually do this kind of thing, or use it to creep people out or to exploit others. So, that happens, but the general practice is ethical and above board, and there's ways in which you can push back and say, I don't want to do that right now. There's also good leadership, and there's ground rules, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so she's talking about a cuddle puddle, which I don't know if that's what she's talking about. I think she might come from a group of friends where they really like to do that. I remember I used to hang out around a lot of burners, people who go to Burning Man. They had a fair amount of that behavior, and above, from just regular cuddle puddles or informal cuddling at a dance party on a couch, nothing sexual happening, or full-on naked stuff, if you will. I don't know what YouTube's going to flag me on. There's a lot of different movements around that, and I applaud all of it. So I'm glad that she was promoting that idea. I'm guessing when you were tuning in to watch me react to the trial, this was not something you thought would be brought up. But for y'all out there, just think about your own cuddling needs, your own touch needs, regardless of gender. Well, actually, particularly if you're a dude, because in all likelihood, you've been socialized to deny that about yourself. Point is that we've all been harmed by society, sometimes by our own families, regarding physical touch. And when we have those influences, it pushes away from our own needs, and we don't get our needs met, and we have a physical need for that. Children, through old age, we have a constant need for physical touch with our fellow people. Consensual, safe, good, fulfilling contact, whether that's just shaking hands or a hug or a cuddle or other kinds of things. We all have those needs, and when we deny those needs, a lot of bad things happen. We might drink to excess, we might drug to excess, we might be angry, we might get depressed, we might be anxious, we might over-depend on our animals, which is another cuddling object that we will have in our lives. And a lot of people will sublimate their human cuddling needs to their animals, which can be a good thing. But I find it to be not great that that's where we pour all of our physical needs is into our animals. There's only so much that can fulfill in my mind, But anyway, so just think about that for yourself. Are you getting your needs met? Where can you start to grow? Where can you start to push the boundaries a little bit so you can get your needs met? A very common thing that I'll talk with clients about is, when do you feel an upwelling when you're around your partner or your parents or your kids or something? Because usually people can identify times where they feel something happening, and that's that coming up from the depths of who we are, of saying, like, you have this need and you see an object that you can actually get that need satisfied with, and then what happens for you? Do you get worried? Do you sublimate to the animals? Do you sublimate by drinking or eating or exercising or overworking, this kind of thing? Do you feel safe to ask? How does your partner tend to react to that? It's an important conversation, and it can get complicated because even if we just think about marriages and couples, there can be a lot of complication, a lot of trauma previously, but also just hurt between the two people where they just stop reaching out to each other regarding that kind of touch. And another aspect to this that I'll say while I'm on this topic is that a lot of men have been socialized to pour all of their attachment and cuddling needs through sexuality. And so when they have an upwelling for a hug, they might convert that into a sexual act towards their partner. And sometimes, not always, the partner is like, do we have to do this now? I'm just doing the dishes. There's no room for, oh, well, what I really wanted to do was just kind of hug you, but felt kind of funny about that because I was taught as a kid that you're not supposed to do that. So I did this other act because I was taught it's okay to do that. and assert my dominance in that way. And so sometimes we have to reprogram people to get to know what's really happening, that they don't actually have an urge to grope, they have an urge to hug their partner. You know what I'm saying? So it's complicated. And of course, a lot of people have trauma around being non-consensually touched, and so that adds another layer of barrier that we have to help people to heal from and create safety around so that everyone can get their needs met.
You're right. You wanted to work.
Nobody's telling me.
Okay, no, you told me.
We're on the road.
You told me what you wanted. You wanted to work. So that's what I came to figure
You're
out.
not going to call you off.
Okay, we're listening to another audio from July 2016, and this is just before they divorced. And it sounds like whoever's recording, their phone or device is in their pocket, because you hear a lot of rubbing against the microphone. I'm always curious as to who knew they were being recorded, because if they both know they're being recorded, then at the very least, I would consider that to be ethical, at least from a moral perspective. But the other question I have is, if one person doesn't know they're being recorded, then we might be able to trust what they're saying a little bit more as authentic, right? Because whoever knows they're being recorded might edit what they're saying a little bit, or at least try to. But anyway, so Amber Heard is saying, you told me you want it, meaning I think a divorce. Oh, you want a divorce. And that's what I came to figure out. Amber's like, you told me you want a divorce. That's what I came to figure out. Johnny's saying, you're not going to call your lawyers and say, stop the process. I don't want a divorce. You're not going to do that. So I'm trying to figure out why they're even playing this audio right now.
Stop the process. I don't want a divorce. You're not going to do that.
Not especially if you
Okay, I don't want a divorce.
You don't? How which one? Which one?
I don't want a divorce. I never wanted a fucking divorce. I never wanted a divorce. I didn't want you to fucking go to Coachella without fucking talking to me.
I think what is happening and why cross-examination is bringing this up is because it appears that she admitted that she punched him for no reason. And also, we're hearing, I think as a secondary effect, is we're hearing another one of those modes where she's pleading. And I talked about this last episode, I believe, where there's a possibility, I don't know, but if Dr. Curry's conceptualization is at least somewhat accurate, for people with borderline, they typically will have a cycle. And it can be an abuse cycle, or it could just be what we might just call a borderline cycle of idealization and devaluation, but it's more nuanced than that. And I talked in the last episode about how there's a certain phase to the cycle in which the borderline individual is feeling like they're going to lose their partner and is entering into a mode where they might regress to a place where they're very nice and very subservient and very kind and pleading and that of a child. And that's kind of what we're hearing now, because for the individual that is borderline, they have a lot of traumas that from their childhood about being abandoned, and that feeling of please don't leave me, please pay attention to me, don't leave me alone, it provokes that original state that the adult had when they were a child, that when they were 3 years old, 5 years old, they were pleading with their parent, don't leave me, or don't abuse me, or pay attention to me, And there's a certain voice intonation that children will exhibit because that's just how kids are, but it'll be retained into adulthood. Not all the time, of course, but it can be. And so I don't know if you're hearing that right now. Now, there's a possibility that when she could just stop and think, she actually did want to divorce him. But I don't know. I mean, there's been a lot of things that she has said on the stand that indicate to me that I think she still has a lot of feelings for him, which wouldn't be unusual for anyone, even in a situation like this. In fact, the other night, there was an interview in which Amber Heard, I didn't watch it, but I heard that my wife watched it, I think, or maybe a clip, and there was apparently a moment in which Amber Heard talks about how the interviewer asked Amber Heard, do you have any ill will towards Johnny Depp? And Amber Heard claimed that she did not, and that she wishes the best for him. So on one hand, you're like, well, that's what you're supposed to say as a PR move. You're not supposed to come across as bitter or something. And it seemed unbelievable because it's like, how could you possibly not have ill will? One, you're claiming he was massively abusive to you. And two, he just sued you and now you're in debt $10 million and you probably have additional couple $1 million from the legal fees that you have to eat now. And so that's pretty rough. How do you have no ill will? And I don't know. It absolutely could be a PR move, or she's just lacking in awareness, which is another claim that Dr. Curry found in Amber, that she's just not aware, which of course, when you go through a lot of difficulty, you cut yourself off from your feelings. You don't have time to get to know your feelings, and that could be a possibility. But another possibility is that she still is fused with Johnny Depp. She still has a lot of wrapped up feelings for him. And this is something that I've seen a lot with people with borderline. I don't know if Amber Heard has borderline, of course, but at the more severe ends of borderline, they often, not all the time, will go through a very dramatic relationship where there's a lot of fighting, perhaps abuse, I don't know, but a lot of drama, a lot of hostility, a lot of back and forth, a lot of, if you're a friend to someone like this, you will frequently hear from either one of the individuals of just about how horrible or toxic their relationship is. And then the breakup will be very dramatic. The aftermath will be very dramatic. They'll get back together and you'll be like, how are you getting back together? And then they separate, and there's just all this drama that can last a long time. And that certainly is one way of characterizing Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Then the borderline individual will continue to be fused with that partner well beyond what other people would consider to be typical, because there's still a part of them that will be on this cycle, even with their partner no longer around. This is when borderline individuals will often start to Google stalk people or, Instagram stalk them and just constantly looking at their pictures because they're still mildly obsessed with this individual, if not completely obsessed. And this is when stalking can begin to happen if you are, regardless of gender, but particularly if you're a man and you feel slighted in some way and you've been taught that you're not supposed to allow that to happen, you might actually go after the person, show up at their work. This is another borderline presentation as well. Of course, most borderline people don't do this sort of thing, but they can. And so you might still be completely obsessed with your partner, way beyond what would be typical. After any breakup, there's always going to be some level of quote unquote obsession. But for the borderline individual, they're still completely wrapped up in it because they have a part of them that is transferring their longing for whoever abandoned them when they were a child onto this partner who has abandoned them in their adult life. And so they are confusing in their heart where to point those feelings. They're pointing it towards their ex-husband instead of towards their parents or whoever it was that abandoned them when they were children. And so they're thinking about them all the time. And there's a possibility that that cycle that I talked about in the last episode will be happening without an interaction with the person, that they will idealize and be like, oh, they're the best, I need to get them back. And then they'll remember some event that their partner did, and then they'll get triggered and be like, oh, I hate that person. They abused me. In fact, they assaulted me, and I'm going to, go to the papers and I'm going to say that, but then, I love him. And the person can have this kind of cycle. And when they're at that side of the cycle, even though you're not involved with them anymore, where they're seeing you as all bad, where you're being devalued. And devalued is a funny word because it doesn't really give it justice. In typical language, in object relations, psychodynamic language, we talk about all good, all bad. It's a splitting. Splitting is a psychodynamic term. And so the individual is seen, your partner, your former partner is seen as it's all good. It's like godly. And she has talked about him on the stand in that way, just like he was wonderful and he was romantic and he was everything and he was beautiful and it was wonderful. And on one hand, you'd be like, well, she's in love. She was in love. She's recounting that. It's pretty normal. But if she were borderline, it might be an example of that all good aspect that she has within her still with Johnny Depp, even though it's years later. And then when it's all bad, it's all bad. It's not like I just hate him. It is, he is an evil, evil, evil human being that must be dealt with somehow. Now, some borderline people, they will just turn away, but some borderline people will actually go after that person and try to say, you will not do that to me. And if you don't have data to attack them, you might either make it up because you're histrionic, or it might feel like it actually happened. And I've witnessed this before. I've talked about this before, but I don't know, just while I'm on this topic. I've witnessed this before where clients will believe things that did not happen. People with borderline will believe things that did not happen, and they are 100% convinced that it happened. It's very hard to get them to consider that what they remember to be true is not true. And it's often around these lines, like someone with borderline, for example, if there were physical altercations, they would remember that detail as a fact, but then they would expand upon that times 100 because of the way it felt. Because when there were physical altercations and just the overall vibe of the relationship, they felt completely unfairly rejected and made to feel like they were worthless, even though the partner might just be reacting rationally to the individual, but they feel completely betrayed, just utterly betrayed. And then that feeling, they filter all of their experiences through that feeling, and what comes out the other side is this completely distorted, delusional account of what happened. I want to remind people that's why we called it borderline back in the day, was because people originally labeled these people as psychotic, meaning that they were hallucinating or delusional, schizophrenic, this kind of they had a thought disorder. They remembered things that didn't happen, and so they were originally labeled as psychotic, similar to what we might call someone with schizophrenia or with schizoaffective. And then over time, they continued to assess these individuals, and they found out, oh, they actually don't really. This group of people that we've been lumping into psychosis and delusions and schizophrenia. There seems to be this subset of people that they only become delusional around relationship issues, and they're typically delusional around rejection. So let's look further into that. And then they said, okay, these people are borderline psychotic. They're not actual psychotic, but they're borderline. They're on the edge of psychosis. And that is what borderline is. Now, it's not anything close to schizophrenia in my conceptualization. It is something that we all do. Whenever we are affected strongly by emotions, we will always remember things differently because we all of us filter our memories through our emotions. Or another way to put it is our memories are emotional. We have a feeling about it, and that is a big part of the memory. It's a big part of the encoding. It's a big part of the recall. So if you have hurt and betrayal feelings times 100, then all your memories are going to be affected even to a greater extent as you recall those or even encode those memories, which is another aspect. Just like, I feel totally betrayed. Something is happening, and it gets filtered through, and then it gets encoded as a distortion, as a delusion, as something that literally didn't happen. And so you could go to the papers and say all these things happened, totally believing that they're true. You could even go on the stand and believe that it's true when it never actually happened. But I don't know. Like I've been saying from the beginning, and the pro-Amber Heard people, hearing what I just said, might even hate me or even decide to bully me online, which I have to tell you is terrifying to me. Just terrifying to think that there's a group of people out there that actually want to hurt me, that want to harm me. It's one thing to hate me. It's one thing to criticize me. It's one thing to think I'm stupid, which doesn't feel great in and of itself, but it's a whole other thing to me and my family to consider that some people out there, and they're out there, that because I say the things that I say on this channel, they actually want to hurt me. They're trying to get me. It's scary, and to some extent I can't wait. Me and my family, we can't wait until this trial is over to some extent. And I think it's not an actual risk, but it's not pleasant. And to the people that are bullying me, all I want to say is, like, it's just me and my wife at home doing this stuff. Like, I'm recording this stuff and posting it. I'm reacting. My wife does a lot of the back end stuff, a lot of the posting and the internet stuff. And by the way, people are always like, well, how come your wife isn't on the show? I have asked her for years and years to be on the show, and she absolutely refuses. It's just occasionally I can get her to agree to maybe do a cameo, like she'll kind of do a drop by, and I even got her to agree to a little bit of that. And I said, okay, you want to do your thing? She's like, no, I don't want to. I'm like, okay. It's just us. So it's not like I'm this massive corporation, like, I don't know, Jimmy Kimmel or something. And when you attack Jimmy Kimmel, he has a security team and a whole bunch of handlers. It's just me and my wife in my house. And so when someone goes after me, I'm thinking, what do I do? What do people do? Do I hire a security guard? Do I hire some sort of online lawyer to go after people because they're actually trying to ruin my life? Like, it's awful. But okay, what I was going to say was, for Amber Heard, it's possible that none of this is true, that she's not borderline, she's not histrionic, that a lot of her accounts are true. I think some of her accounts that are disbelieved might very well be true. A lot of her accounts of the drug and alcohol abuse that Johnny Depp exhibited, some of the things around him being violent with her, I think are possible.
Because I left you because you were fucking... You fucking haymakered me, man. You came around the bed and fucking start punching on me. Why? I love you.
All right, so if you didn't hear that, it sounds like she's crying and pleading. She says, "You what?" And he says, "You effing haymakered me, man. You came around the bed and effing started punching me." And then Amber Heard is saying in this very sad, pleading voice, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sad. I love you so much, Johnny. Why? And yeah, this is good audio to present. I'm pretty sure Amber Heard is going to say that I never did that. I was just trying to please him so he wouldn't hurt me anymore. Doesn't sound very plausible when you take in all the evidence, but I'm curious what she'll say.
That's what really happened the evening of your 30th birthday, isn't it, Miss Heard?
No, that's incorrect.
Mr. Depp was in bed, and then you came around the bed and started punching him.
That's incorrect.
You don't deny that in the recording, do you, Miss Heard?
I'm not having that conversation with Johnny. I'm not denying anything. I'm not saying anything. I'm not having that conversation with Johnny. I was trying to get out of that hotel room. That was a mediation attempt. That was the recording you just heard. It was us meeting in a hotel.
But you're talking about your 30th birthday.
No, we're not.
Well, you're talking about something. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's not much one could say if you're Amber Heard to explain that. Yeah, what could you possibly say?
You're not talking about going to Coachella and...
Johnny's talking about that. I am not arguing with him about any of that.
Right. You don't deny anything, do you?
I'm not talking to him about that.
Yeah, okay. So I think what her strategy is, she is claiming he is talking with me about an event, but I am not talking with him about that event. I am not even addressing what he's talking about because I was just trying to get away from him. It doesn't sound like that. Certainly doesn't sound like that. It sounds like you're trying to get him back. There's so many elements to this back and forth that it just doesn't sound like you're trying to get away from him. It never sounded like you were trying to get away from him. Even when you said, "I'm going to leave right now," within a minute you came back, that kind of thing. That's the only time we heard you actually walk away. And in that instance, you weren't even really fighting. Anyway, yeah, so that's her strategy of just like, yeah, that's what's on the recording, but he's making up a bunch of lies, and I'm just trying to get out of there. So that's why that sounds like that. It's just not believable. It's possible. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others because we all deserve it. We really, really do.